How dare you help that beggar? You've shamed us all. Get out, Sarah. This estate is no longer yours.
You can't do this.
She had no idea the mansion she flaunted wasn't hers. It belonged to the quiet stepdaughter she just humiliated in front of everyone. When Sarah's arrogant stepmother slapped her across the face at their family's dinner party for helping what looked like a blind beggar outside, she crossed a line she could never uncross. But that beggar wasn't just anyone. He was the family's lawyer, and he'd just witnessed everything. The moment Sarah's stepsister kicked her out of her own $5 trillion estate, thinking she'd won, the lawyer made one phone call that flipped their entire world upside down. What happened next didn't just shock the family, it destroyed them. Because Sarah had been hiding the biggest secret of all, and they were about to find out the hard way that you don't slap the person who actually owns everything you're standing on. This is the story of how one act of kindness exposed a web of lies, greed, and a secret inheritance that would change everything. The echo of Victoria Hartwell's palm against Sarah Chen's cheek hung in the air like a death sentence no one else could hear yet. It was 7:47 p.m. on a Saturday evening in June, and the Hartwell estate's grand dining room, with its hand-carved mahogany panels imported from Indonesia in 1987 and crystal chandeliers worth $340,000 each, had fallen into the kind of silence that precedes catastrophic change. 23 guests, dressed in designer evening wear that collectively cost more than most people's annual salaries, sat frozen mid-conversation, champagne flutes suspended halfway to lips, forks hovering over plates of seared duck breast with blackberry reduction. Sarah didn't move. She stood there, one hand still clutching the worn leather briefcase she'd carried in from outside, the other slowly rising to touch her reddening cheek. Her simple navy dress, a $89 piece from a department store clearance rack, stood in stark contrast to Victoria's custom Valentino gown, the one with hand-sewn, pearls that had required 3 fittings and cost $47,000. "How dare you embarrass this family?" Victoria hissed, her voice dripping with the particular venom that only stepmothers in positions of unearned authority seem to perfect. "Bringing some filthy homeless man to our door during a dinner party? Have you no shame? No sense of propriety?" Sarah's younger stepsister, Melissa Hartwell, 24 years old, and draped in jewelry she'd charged to credit cards she didn't pay herself, stood from her seat with theatrical indignation. "She's always been like this, Mother, playing the saint, making us look bad with her pathetic charity cases." Melissa's voice carried that specific pitch of cruelty that comes from someone who's never been denied anything. "I think it's time we had a serious conversation about whether Sarah even belongs in this house anymore." What neither Victoria nor Melissa knew, what they couldn't have known because Sarah had never told them, had never told anyone, except the lawyers who'd drawn up the documents, was that Sarah Chen didn't just belong in this house. She owned it. Every square inch of it. All 47,000 square feet, sitting on 128 acres of prime Connecticut real estate, valued at exactly $5.2 trillion in the trust documents her late father had established before his death 14 months ago. The trust documents that currently sat in a fireproof safe in the estate's legal office, the one Victoria had converted into her personal yoga studio because she'd assumed all the important papers were kept at the firm downtown. They weren't. Sarah's father, Jonathan Chen, had been very specific in his instructions before the cancer took him, very specific about who would inherit what, when, and under what conditions. Victoria had married him only 3 years before his death, a whirlwind romance that Sarah had watched with quiet concern, saying nothing because her father seemed happy, and happiness had been rare for him after Sarah's mother died when Sarah was 12. Victoria had assumed, as gold diggers often do, that a wedding ring and a death certificate would equal automatic inheritance. She'd miscalculated. Badly. The blind beggar Sarah had helped outside, the elderly man in tattered clothes who'd been sitting by the estate's front gates, wasn't blind at all. His name was Thomas Whitmore, senior partner at Whitmore and Associates, the law firm that had handled the Chen family's legal affairs for 42 years. The same Thomas Whitmore who'd drafted Jonathan Chen's will, established Sarah's trust, and had been conducting what he called character assessments of Victoria and Melissa for the past year, as per the will's stipulations. Jonathan Chen had been a brilliant man, made wealthy through patents in renewable energy technology that were now licensed to 17 countries. He'd also been cautious. The will included a clause. If at any point in the first 2 years after his death, Victoria or Melissa demonstrated patterns of abuse, financial exploitation, or emotional cruelty towards Sarah, the protective trust would collapse and Sarah would gain immediate, unrestricted control of the entire estate. Thomas Whitmore had just witnessed pattern number 47. But this one, this public slap, this humiliation in front of witnesses, this was the one that would activate everything. He stood now in the doorway, no longer stooped or trembling. His blindness vanished as he straightened his spine and pulled a phone from his coat pocket. Sarah saw him. Victoria didn't. Victoria was too busy addressing her captive audience, playing the role of the wronged matriarch. "This is what we've tolerated for years," Victoria announced to the room, her voice sharp and controlled, the voice of someone accustomed to being believed. A stepdaughter who refuses to understand her place, who deliberately undermines family dignity, who, Mrs. Hartwell, Thomas Whitmore's voice cut through her monologue like a scalpel through silk. "I'm afraid we need to have a conversation. Immediately." Victoria turned, her expression shifting from righteous anger to confusion as she registered the well-dressed attorney standing where a homeless man had been minutes before. "I'm sorry. Who are you? This is a private event." "Thomas Whitmore. Whitmore and Associates. I represent the Chen family estate. And as of 7:47 p.m. this evening, certain legal mechanisms have been triggered that require your immediate attention." The room's temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Sarah watched her stepmother's face cycle through emotions: confusion, recognition, calculation, and finally, the first flicker of fear. "I don't understand," Victoria said, but her voice had lost its certainty. "Sarah has no legal standing in this estate. Jonathan's will was very clear, that as his wife, I inherited." "That's not accurate," Thomas said quietly, pulling a tablet from his briefcase and tapping it twice. "And I have video evidence from this evening that confirms the final condition has been met. Sarah, would you please come with me to the study? We have documents that need your signature." "Documents?" Melissa's voice cracked slightly. "What documents?" "Mother, what is he talking about?" But Victoria had gone pale, her mind clearly racing back through years of assumptions, through casual cruelties delivered without consequence, through credit cards used and accounts accessed, and decisions made about a house and property she'd thought were hers by right of marriage. Sarah looked at Thomas Whitmore, then at her stepmother, then at the 23 guests who would definitely be talking about this dinner party for years to come. "I think," Sarah said softly, her voice steady despite the handprint still visible on her cheek, "we should all hear this together." And in that moment, in the silence before everything collapsed, Sarah Chen felt the weight of power she'd never asked for and wasn't certain she wanted to use. "I think we should all hear this together," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade through water. Victoria's head snapped toward her stepdaughter, eyes narrowing with that particular brand of contempt she'd perfected over 3 years of marriage to a dying man. "Excuse me. Sarah, this is not the time for one of your— Actually, Mrs. Hartwell, Sarah is correct," Thomas Whitmore interrupted, his transformation from frail beggar to commanding attorney now complete. He straightened his spine fully, pulled reading glasses from his breast pocket, and walked with measured steps to the head of the dining table, where where Victoria had been presiding like a queen over a kingdom that had never been hers. What I'm about to disclose affects everyone in this room. Transparency seems appropriate. The 23 guests remained frozen, their curiosity clearly overpowering their discomfort. The mayor's wife, Patricia Dennison, set down her champagne flute with a soft clink that sounded like a gunshot in the silence. State Senator Michael Rodriguez leaned forward slightly, his political instincts sensing a story that would dominate Connecticut social circles for months. Thomas set his leather briefcase on the table, opened it with 2 decisive clicks, and extracted a tablet and a manila folder thick with documents. On March 15th, 2023, at precisely 3:17 p.m., Jonathan Chen executed his final will and testament in my office at Whitmore & Associates, located at 1847 Chapel Street in New Haven. 3 witnesses were present: myself, my partner Rebecca Summers, and a notary public named David Kim. The will was filed with the Connecticut Probate Court on August 1st, 2023, 2 days after Mr. Chen's death. Victoria's hand, still gripping the back of her chair, began to tremble. Sarah noticed. She noticed everything now. The way Melissa's breathing had become shallow. The way Victoria's carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the blood draining from her face. The way the diamond bracelet on her stepmother's wrist caught the chandelier light. That bracelet had cost $67,000. Sarah knew because she'd seen the credit card statement 3 months ago, charged to an account that drew from estate funds Victoria had assumed were hers to spend. The will established an irrevocable trust, Thomas continued, tapping his tablet screen twice. The device projected a holographic display above the dining table, blue-tinted legal documents floating in the air like ghosts of broken assumptions. Total valuation, $5.2 trillion. Assets include this estate and its 128 acres, a property portfolio spanning 7 states, investment accounts with Vanguard and BlackRock, and exclusive licensing rights to 17 renewable energy patents, currently generating $340 million annually from contracts with governments and corporations in 12 countries. That's impossible, Victoria whispered, but her voice had lost all its earlier venom. Now it just sounded hollow, like an echo in an empty room. The primary beneficiary, Thomas said, his eyes moving deliberately to Sarah, has always been Sarah Elizabeth Chen, Mr. Chen's only biological child and heir. However, Mr. Chen was deeply concerned about Sarah's emotional well-being following his death. He worried, and I quote from his recorded deposition on March 15th, that certain parties might exploit my daughter's grief, create conditions of psychological abuse, or attempt to force her from her childhood home through sustained cruelty. Sarah remembered that conversation. She'd been sitting in the hospital cafeteria at 4:23 p.m. on March 14th, eating terrible vending machine crackers, when her father had called her back to his room. "I need you to do something hard, sweetheart," he'd said, his voice already weakening from the morphine. "I need you to let Thomas watch over things for a while. I need you to be patient. Can you do that for me?" She'd promised. She'd kept that promise for 14 months, living like a ghost in her own home. Therefore, Thomas continued, the will included a 2-year protection period. During this time, the estate would operate under a restricted trust with myself as executor. I was given legal authority to monitor household dynamics through a comprehensive security system Mr. Chen installed throughout the property in January 2021. Audio and video surveillance in all common areas, preserved on encrypted servers with timestamps and facial recognition metadata. Melissa's wine glass slipped from her fingers, shattering against her plate. Red liquid spread across the white tablecloth like blood. "You've been recording us?" Her voice cracked on the last word. "For how long?" 27 months, Thomas replied without inflection. Every conversation in this dining room, the sitting rooms, the kitchen, the hallways, the library, the study. Approximately 14,000 780 hours of footage, all cataloged and indexed by date, time, participants, and content keywords. The editor from Connecticut Lifestyle magazine, a woman named Jennifer Park, who'd written 3 glowing features about Victoria's impeccable taste in home decor, had gone completely still, her journalist's mind clearly calculating headline implications. Thomas pulled a document from the manila folder and placed it on the table in front of Sarah. The trust included a collapse clause. If at any point during the protection period, documented evidence showed patterns of abuse, financial, emotional, or physical, directed at Sarah by residents of the estate, the trust would immediately dissolve. Sarah would gain full, unrestricted control of all assets, effective the moment conditions were met. He looked up at Victoria, and his expression held no anger, no satisfaction, just the cool assessment of someone who'd spent a career watching people destroy themselves. At 7:47 p.m. this evening, you struck Sarah Chen across the face in the presence of multiple witnesses. That constitutes assault under Connecticut General Statutes, Section 53-61. Combined with 127 documented instances of verbal abuse over 14 months, unauthorized expenditures totaling $1.3 million from estate accounts, and sworn testimony from 8 household staff members regarding hostile work environment, the conditions have been met. He turned to Sarah. The trust collapsed at 7:47 p.m. As of this moment, Sarah, you have complete legal authority over this entire estate. That includes all financial accounts, all property decisions, and all determinations regarding residency. The question hung in the air like smoke. What would she do with that power? Sarah looked down at the document Thomas had placed before her. The paper was cream-colored, heavy stock, the kind that suggested permanence and consequence. At the top, in serif font that seemed deliberately chosen to convey gravity, authorization for immediate asset control and residency, determination. Her hand hovered over it, not quite touching, as if the paper itself might burn. Sarah. Victoria's voice had changed entirely. Gone was the sharp-edged cruelty, replaced by something Sarah had never heard from her stepmother before. Naked fear. Please, let's go somewhere private and discuss this like reasonable adults. There's been a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? The words came from Thomas, not Sarah. He pulled his tablet closer and swiped through files with practiced efficiency. Let me clarify. On September 12th, 2023, at 2:34 p.m., you told Sarah, and I quote from the audio recording, "You're lucky Jonathan felt sorry for you. Otherwise you'd be working at some little nonprofit making poverty wages. Don't forget that everything you have is because I allow you to stay here." Would you like me to play the recording? Victoria's mouth opened, then closed. Around the table, the 23 guests had become a jury, their faces reflecting various degrees of shock, fascination, and carefully concealed satisfaction. This was the kind of scandal that would fuel country club conversations for years. Sarah's fingers finally touched the document. The paper felt exactly like regular paper, not special at all, despite representing the power to destroy 2 lives with a single signature. On November 3rd, 2023, Thomas continued, his voice steady as a metronome counting down to an execution. Melissa charged $23,400 to the estate Amex for a weekend in Miami. The card was issued in your late father's name, Sarah, but the expenditure was authorized by Mrs. Hartwell without your knowledge or consent. On December 17th, another $31,200 for jewelry from Tiffany's. On January 8th, 2024, $18,600 for Stop. Sarah's voice was quiet, but it cut through Thomas's recitation like scissors through thread. Please stop. Thomas paused, his finger hovering over the tablet screen. Sarah looked at Melissa, really looked at her. Her stepsister was 24 years old, wearing a dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and crying. Not the manipulative tears Sarah had seen her deploy when she wanted something from their father, but genuine, terrified crying. Mascara tracked down her cheeks in dark rivulets, and her hands shook as she gripped the edge of the table. "Where would we go?" Melissa whispered. If you make us leave, where would we even go?" It was a good question. Victoria had come into the marriage with minimal assets, a paid-off Honda Civic, and about $47,000 in savings, according to the financial disclosure she'd been required to sign before the wedding. She'd spent the $2 million settlement within 11 months. The credit card statements Thomas had compiled showed a pattern of increasingly desperate spending. Luxury goods, spa treatments, a leased Mercedes S-Class at $2,100 monthly, jewelry, designer clothes, a $34,000 donation to her alma mater to get her name on a building plaque. Sarah pulled the document closer and found a pen in her jacket pocket, a cheap ballpoint she'd picked up at a hospital gift shop 14 months ago when she'd needed to sign her father's DNR paperwork at 3:17 a.m. She'd kept it ever since, though she couldn't explain why. "Thomas," she said slowly, "if I sign this, what happens? Specifically?" Thomas set down his tablet and looked at her with something that might have been respect. "All accounts currently in Victoria's and Melissa's names will be frozen within 15 minutes. The freeze will remain in place pending a complete forensic audit of expenditures dating back to August 2023. Any charges made using estate funds without your explicit authorization will be documented. You'll have the option to pursue criminal charges for fraud and embezzlement, though prosecution would be at your discretion." He paused, letting that sink in. "Regarding residency, you have the legal right to terminate their occupancy immediately. Connecticut law requires 30 days' notice for eviction under normal circumstances, but given the documented abuse and the fact that they have no legal claim to the property, you could have them removed tonight. I have a security team on standby, and I've already contacted Chief Morrison at the Greenwich Police Department to ensure the process is handled appropriately." Victoria made a sound, half gasp, half sob. "Tonight? You'd put us on the street tonight." Sarah's pen touched the signature line. The ink flowed blue-black against cream paper, forming the first letter of her name. S. She stopped. In her mind, unbidden, came a memory from 6 years ago. She'd been 18, home from her first semester at Yale, and had found her father sitting alone in his study at 11:47 p.m., staring at photographs of her mother. He'd been crying silently, the way men of his generation often did, thinking no one could see. She'd sat with him for 3 hours that night, neither of them speaking much, just being present in shared grief. "My greatest fear," he'd finally said, at 2:23 a.m., "is that you'll end up alone like me. That you'll build walls so high that no one can reach you, even people who might genuinely care." "Then why the protection period?" she'd asked. "Why make me wait and watch and document everything? Why not just give me control immediately?" He'd looked at her with eyes that seemed older than his 56 years. "Because I need to know that when you have power, real power, the kind that can destroy people, you'll use it with wisdom, not anger. Anyone can punish, Sarah. Very few people know when mercy is the stronger choice." The dining room was absolutely silent now. Even the grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to have stopped ticking, though Sarah knew that was impossible. She looked at the document, at the signature line, at the blue-black S that began her name but didn't finish it. Then she looked at Thomas Whitmore, the man her father had trusted with everything. "I need 24 hours, she said. "Before I sign this, I need 24 hours to think." Thomas's eyebrows rose slightly, the first sign of surprise he'd shown all evening. "Sarah, I should advise you that delaying— I know what I'm doing." She stood up, still holding the unsigned document. "Victoria, Melissa, you'll stay in your rooms tonight. You will not access any accounts. You will not make any calls to lawyers or friends or journalists, and you will not leave the property. Thomas, can you arrange for someone to ensure that happens? Yes, Thomas said slowly. But Sarah, tomorrow at 7 p.m., we'll meet in the study, just the four of us. And then I'll decide. She looked around at the 23 guests, at their fascinated faces. This dinner party is over. Thank you all for coming. I apologize for the disruption. She walked out of the dining room, still holding the unsigned document, leaving behind a silence that roared louder than any scream. Sarah didn't sleep. She sat in her father's study, her study now technically, though she still thought of it as his, watching the antique clock on the mantelpiece count down the hours. It was 11:34 p.m. when she'd first settled into the leather chair that still smelled faintly of his cologne, a scent called Terre d'Hermès that he'd worn every day for 23 years. Now it was 4:17 a.m., and the unsigned document lay on the desk in front of her like an unexploded bomb. Outside, through the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the east lawn, she could see the security team Thomas had posted. 2 men in dark suits, walking patrol patterns with the precision of former military. They weren't there to keep intruders out. They were there to keep Victoria and Melissa in. Sarah picked up her phone and scrolled through the files Thomas had sent her at 11:52 p.m., a complete dossier of the last 14 months, organized by category and severity. She'd been reading for 4 hours and 33 minutes, and she was only halfway through. Financial exploitation, Category A, unauthorized major expenditures. September 23rd, 2023, 3:47 p.m., $67,000, Harry Winston bracelet, Beverly Hills. October 8th, 2023, 10:23 a.m., $34,000, charitable donation to Hartwell Alumni Fund, naming rights purchased in Victoria's name. November 3rd, 2023, 2:16 p.m., $23,400, Fontainebleau, Miami Beach, Presidential Suite, 4 nights. December 17th, 2023, 4:51 p.m., $31,200, Tiffany & Company, diamond earrings. January 8th, 2024, 9:34 a.m., $18,600, Bergdorf Goodman, spring wardrobe. The list went on for 7 pages. Total, $1,347,892. Verbal abuse, Category B, recorded instances. Sarah clicked on the first audio file. Her stepmother's voice filled the study, crisp and clear through the computer speakers. You're pathetic, you know that. 25 years old, and you spend your weekends volunteering at homeless shelters. Your father left you a fortune, and you dress like a graduate student. It's embarrassing. That had been October 15th, 2023, at 7:23 p.m. in the breakfast room. Sarah remembered the moment. She'd been eating cereal, reading a book about sustainable urban development. Victoria had walked in, poured herself wine, and delivered that assessment like a weather report. Sarah had said nothing. She'd finished her cereal, washed her bowl, and gone back to her room. She clicked on another file. Melissa this time, talking to a friend on speakerphone in the sitting room, November 29th, 2023, 2:41 p.m. Oh my God, Sarah. She's like this weird ghost who lives here. Mom keeps her around because it would look bad to kick out the dead guy's daughter, but honestly, she's so awkward. She has no friends, no life, no social skills. I actually feel sorry for her. Laughter from the friend, Melissa's laugh joining in. Sarah closed the file and stared at the ceiling. The study's coffered panels were made from reclaimed wood from a 17th century Portuguese monastery. Her father had bought them at auction in 2019 for $340,000 and had them installed as a 50th birthday present to himself. He'd told Sarah the story while they installed his book collection together, just the two of them. spending an entire weekend organizing 2,000 volumes by subject and author. Material things don't matter much, he'd said at 6:47 p.m. on a Sunday evening, shelving a first edition of Walden. But the stories behind them do. These panels survived wars, revolutions, centuries of prayer. Now they'll survive me. They'll protect whatever comes next. Sarah wondered what he'd think of what was coming next. At 5:03 a.m., there was a soft knock on the study door. "Come in," Sarah said, not turning around. The door opened. Thomas Whitmore entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee and looking like he'd slept even less than she had. "I saw your light on," he said, setting 1 cup on the desk beside the unsigned document. "Thought you might need this." "Thank you." Thomas sat in the chair across from her, the one where her father used to sit when they'd have their Friday evening conversations about everything and nothing. "Sarah, I need to tell you something. Something that's not in the files." She looked at him. His expression was troubled in a way she'd never seen before. Not the professional concern of an attorney, but something more personal. "Your father came to my office on March 14th, 2023, the day before he signed the will. It was late, around 8:30 p.m. He was very sick by then. He could barely walk. But he insisted on meeting in person, not over video call." Thomas wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "He told me he was afraid he'd failed you, that by protecting you with this trust structure, he was actually setting you up for something worse than financial loss." "What do you mean?" "He was afraid," Thomas said quietly, "that you'd become hard, that watching them abuse you for 2 years, documenting everything, playing this long game, he was afraid it would teach you that power is something you accumulate in silence and then deploy without mercy. He worried he was training you to be like him." Sarah frowned. "My father was kind. He was generous. He donated millions to... He was ruthless, Sarah." Thomas's voice was gentle but firm. "In business, your father was absolutely ruthless. When competitors tried to steal his patents, he didn't just sue them. He systematically destroyed their companies, bought their assets at bankruptcy auctions, and made sure everyone in the industry knew what happened when you crossed Jonathan Chen. He believed in consequences, total consequences." The coffee had gone, cold in Sarah's hands. "He told me that night that he saw himself in you," Thomas continued. "The same intelligence, the same capacity for patience, the same ability to endure pain without showing it. And he said..." Thomas paused, his voice catching slightly. He said, "If she uses this power the way I would have used it, I'll have failed her as a father. The money doesn't matter. Whether she destroys them doesn't matter. What matters is whether she can find a way to be stronger than I was." Sarah set down her coffee cup. Her hands were shaking. "He never told me what stronger meant," Thomas said. "I don't know if he meant forgiveness or boundaries or some third option I haven't imagined. But I think, and this is just my opinion, Sarah, not legal advice, I think the fact that you didn't sign that document last night, that you asked for 24 hours, that you're sitting here at 5 a.m. reading files and drinking cold coffee instead of celebrating your victory, I think that means something." The clock on the mantelpiece chimed 5:15 a.m. In 13 hours and 45 minutes, Sarah would have to make a decision. "What would you do?" she asked. "If you were me?" Thomas smiled sadly. "I'm not you. I'm a 72-year-old attorney who spent 50 years watching wealthy people destroy each other over money. What I do isn't relevant. The question is, what kind of person do you want to be when this is over?" He stood up, leaving his coffee untouched on the side table. "The meeting is at 7 p.m. Whatever you decide, I'll support it. The documents are ready either way." After he left, Sarah sat alone with her father's ghost and her own conscience, watching the sun rise over property that had always been hers, but had never felt like home. At 6:47 a.m., she finally picked up the pen, moved across paper, but Sarah wasn't signing the document. She was writing something else. A letter she'd never intended to write, to a father who'd been dead for 14 months and 3 days. Dad, I think I finally understand what you were afraid of. At 7 p.m. exactly, Sarah walked into the study where Victoria and Melissa were already waiting. Thomas stood by the window, his posture rigid with professional neutrality, but his eyes tracked Sarah's movements with barely concealed concern. Victoria looked like she'd aged a decade overnight. Her hair, usually maintained with religious precision at the Greenwich Salon every Thursday, at 2 p.m. for $480 per appointment, hung limp around her face. No makeup. The custom Valentino gown from last night had been replaced with a simple black dress Sarah recognized from 3 years ago, one of the few items Victoria had brought into the marriage that hadn't been purchased with someone else's money. Melissa sat with her hands folded in her lap like a child waiting for punishment. Her eyes were red-rimmed and swollen. Sarah took her seat behind the desk, her father's desk, made from Brazilian rosewood that was now illegal to harvest, purchased in 1997 for $34,000. She set down the manila folder Thomas had given her and the unsigned authorization document on top of it. "I've spent the last 18 hours," Sarah began, her voice steady despite having slept 0 minutes, "reading every file, listening to every recording, reviewing every transaction. Thomas was very thorough." Victoria opened her mouth. Sarah raised one hand. "I'm going to talk first. You're going to listen. Then you'll have a chance to speak. And then I'll tell you what I've decided." The silence was absolute. Even the grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to hold its breath. "On September 12th, 2023, at 2:34 p.m., you told me I was lucky you allowed me to stay here. You said everything I had was because of your generosity." Sarah pulled out a printed transcript, though she'd memorized the words. "On October 15th, at 7:23 p.m., you called me pathetic for volunteering at homeless shelters. On November 29th, Melissa, you told your friend Caroline that I was this weird ghost, with no friends, no life, no social skills." Melissa flinched. "Sarah, I'm not finished." Sarah's voice didn't rise, but something in it made Melissa's mouth snap shut. "You charged $1,347,892 to accounts that weren't yours. You redecorated my mother's sitting room, the one place in this house I asked you never to touch, and you turned it into a yoga studio. You fired Mrs. Patterson, who'd worked for my family for 19 years, because she asked you not to use my mother's china for a party. You replaced her with someone who'd never question anything you did." Sarah paused, looking at the unsigned document. "I could destroy you both, completely. Thomas has criminal charges prepared. Fraud, embezzlement, identity theft. I could have you arrested tonight. I could make sure you never work in Connecticut again, that your names become synonymous with greed and betrayal. I have that power." Victoria's breathing had become rapid and shallow. Melissa was crying silently, tears streaming down her face without sound. "But my father didn't give me this power, so I could use it like a weapon," Sarah continued. "He gave it to me to see if I'd become like him. Ruthless, unforgiving. Someone who believed that consequences had to be total to be meaningful." She picked up the authorization document and very deliberately tore it in half. Victoria gasped. Thomas's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, or perhaps relief. "I'm not signing this," Sarah said. "Not because you don't deserve consequences. You do. But because I need to be able to look at myself in the mirror tomorrow, and the next day, and every day after that. And I can't do that if I become the kind of person who destroys people, even people who hurt me." She pulled out a different document from the folder, one she'd spent from 6:47 a.m. until 11:23 a.m., drafting with Thomas's reluctant assistance. "This is what's going to happen instead. Victoria, You're going to repay every dollar you spent from estate accounts. Thomas has set up a payment plan, $4,500 per month for the next 25 years. The payments are non-negotiable and legally binding. If you miss a single one, criminal charges will be filed automatically. Victoria's face had gone white. I don't have $4,500 a month. I don't have any income. Then you'll get a job, Sarah said flatly. You have a master's degree in marketing from Boston University. You graduated summa cum laude in 1998. I know because I read your file. You're 53 years old and perfectly capable of working. So work. She turned to Melissa. You charged $347,000 in personal expenses. Same terms. $1,400 per month for 25 years. And you're both moving out of this house. You have 60 days to find alternative housing. Thomas will provide letters of reference that are factually accurate, but neutral. After that, you're on your own. Melissa was openly sobbing now. Where are we supposed to go? We can't afford. There are apartments in Stamford, in Norwalk, in Bridgeport, Sarah said. Places where $2,000 a month gets you something livable. You'll have to adjust your expectations. You'll have to learn to live within your means. But you'll survive. She stood up, picking up the torn authorization document. I'm not doing this to be kind to you. I'm doing this because my father was wrong about one thing. Power doesn't prove anything. Restraint does. Knowing you could destroy someone and choosing not to, that's the only victory that means anything. Sarah walked toward the door, then paused. You're not invited to family dinners anymore. You're not welcome at holidays. If I see you at charity events or social gatherings, I'll be polite, but distant. The relationship we pretended to have for 3 years is over. But I'm not going to ruin your lives. You'll do that yourselves if you can't change. She left the study without waiting for a response. Thomas followed her into the hallway, closing the door behind them. You know they'll hate you for this, he said quietly. Possibly more than if you'd destroyed them. People rarely forgive mercy when they were expecting annihilation. I know, Sarah said, but I can live with their hatred. I don't think I could live with becoming what they thought I was. Just another rich person who treats people like disposable problems to be solved with lawyers and money. Thomas smiled, and for the first time since this started, it reached his eyes. Your father would be proud, and probably frustrated. He liked clean endings. Life doesn't have clean endings, Sarah said. Just choices we make and consequences we live with. 3 months later, Sarah stood in the breakfast room at 7:23 a.m., drinking coffee and reading the New York Times article about renewable energy policy. The house was quiet. Mrs. Patterson was back, along with the rest of the original staff Victoria had fired. The sitting room had been restored to look exactly as it had when Sarah's mother was alive, down to the photographs and the blue velvet curtains she'd chosen in 2009. Victoria and Melissa had moved to a 2-bedroom apartment in Stamford. According to Thomas's monthly reports, Victoria was working as a marketing consultant for a mid-sized firm, making $78,000 annually. Melissa had taken a job at a nonprofit, starting salary $42,000. They were both making their payments on time. Sarah had seen them once, accidentally, at a grocery store in Greenwich. Victoria had looked at her with something that might have been resentment or might have been shame. Sarah couldn't tell and didn't particularly care. Melissa had turned away entirely, disappearing down an aisle before. Sarah could decide whether to acknowledge her. The question that haunted Sarah wasn't whether she'd made the right choice. It was whether there'd been a right choice at all. She'd shown restraint. She'd chosen mercy over destruction. She'd proven she wasn't her father's ruthless business instincts made flesh. But she'd also condemned 2 women to 25 years of debt payments, forced them from comfort into struggle, and severed all family ties with surgical precision. She'd wielded her power gently, but she'd wielded it nonetheless. Was that justice? Was it wisdom? Or was it just another form of cruelty, stretched out over decades instead of delivered in a single blow? Sarah set down her coffee and looked out the window at the ground she owned, the estate she'd inherited, the empire of money and property and power that had landed in her lap through nothing more than an accident of birth. Her phone buzzed. A text from Thomas. Board meeting at 2 p.m. They want your approval on the new solar initiative. $340 million commitment. She typed back, I'll be there. Because that was the thing about power. It didn't go away just because you chose not to use it for revenge. It sat there, waiting, demanding decisions about what to build and what to destroy, who to help, and who to hold accountable. Sarah picked up her coffee and walked through her mansion, past rooms she'd grown up in and rooms she'd suffered in, and she wondered if anyone who inherited power could ever use it without becoming, in some small way, the thing they feared. She didn't have an answer, but she kept walking anyway. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe. Get us to 1,000 subscribers so that we will be able to produce more videos like this for you.